I want to say thank you to everybody who watched my last video. I am blown away by the response. I did not expect that many views. I did not expect that many comments. I tried to read every single comment, and I think everybody got a reply from me. Um, it got to the point where I couldn't really give in-depth replies anymore. There's just so many. So thank you so much. It's just incredible to see the discussions going on, people sharing their experiences, sharing their own understandings, and I'm really glad to see that the video that I made helped many, many, many people. So here is the next one. As you can see, we have Steve. Steve has heard about enlightenment, and he's decided, you know what, the heck with it. I want to know what this is all about. I'm gonna follow this path. I'm gonna start the journey towards enlightenment. This video is inspired by two comments that I received on the last video. One from KK Woom, who said, "What is the enlightenment journey, and what is it like to experience? Are there stages, and do you alternate between them? Sometimes I feel like I have to catch a part of myself to a higher vibration, while other areas seem really solid. Thanks." The other comment I got was from someone named Cloud But Floating, who asked, "Do you find life complicated at the stage you are at now? Considering that society functions on the basis of concepts, does it keep pulling you into identification with thoughts?" So in this video, I'm going to attempt to explain as best I can an answer to these questions. If you remember our last video, we had a model that looked something like this. There were stages or levels of self-awareness where your perspective of thinking changes as you go up those stages. This is part of that enlightenment journey. This is something that you could use to keep track of or be mindful of during that journey towards enlightenment. It is essentially a barometer for measuring where you might be in terms of how you're thinking about any given situation or experience or phenomenon that arises within your lived experience. Now let's describe the actual steps that Steve needs to take in order to move along this path towards enlightenment. What does that journey actually look like? The steps or the tools you're going to use on your journey are meditation, mindfulness, and relinquishment. Now there are many paths up the side of the mountain in order to achieve enlightenment, but most of them include these three tools. Steve's also confused as to what enlightenment actually is, and the shortest way to describe enlightenment in a way that makes sense and is pertinent to our journey is self-knowledge or knowledge of the self. And when I say self, I mean the true self, the self with a capital S. This is not the self that you think of when you're considering your personality, your likes and dislikes, your ego persona. This is the self that is actually void of those thought forms. There is no attachment to that ego persona. There may not even be an ego persona anymore when you become fully enlightened. That's as much as I can say without delving into areas that I don't actually personally understand. A very succinct way to describe enlightenment that has been used often is a non-dual state of awareness where all is one. So if you were experiencing a non-dual state of awareness, your sense of self would include everything. You would sense that your being is all things. But for the purposes of moving along the path towards enlightenment, knowing what enlightenment actually is not as crucial. Let's describe and define what these three tools are for the path towards enlightenment. Meditation, very briefly, is a one-pointed focus on a chosen phenomenon. Usually that is the breath. If you're taught basic meditation, you're typically placing your awareness on the bottom of the nostrils where you can feel your breath, or your stomach where you can feel your diaphragm move up and down. Perhaps it's also your chest. But the one-pointed focus doesn't have to be placed on the breath. It can be placed on any phenomenon. It could also be placed on all phenomenon. If you want to meditate while focusing on all things, say all the sounds you could hear at once, by having a sort of diffuse awareness, that's also a form of meditation. The point is that you are being one-pointed. This means that every time that your focus strays from that point, you're simply bringing it back. So if it is the breath under the nose, then if you start thinking and paying attention to the thoughts, or if you start listening to noises, then you just bring your attention back to the breath. The next tool that we have on this journey is the mindfulness practice. Essentially, this is staying alert and aware of oneself and their thoughts, sensations, actions, etc. Relinquishment essentially means to surrender or let go of things that you might be attached to. So just to summarize the steps, we want to gain self-knowledge. In order to know the self, one must remove everything that isn't the self. The way we do this is we meditate to create spaciousness. So we want a daily practice of meditation. This frees up the mind in order to be consistently mindful throughout our day and throughout our experiences. This way, anything we experience, we can relinquish, particularly the things that perpetuate ego and a sense of separation. How about we give an example, just a little one, of Steve applying this to his daily life in order to make progress on the path. Up here we have Steve and his roommate. Let's call her Sally. So Steve is really angry at Sally because she broke his favorite mug. It's even got a little smoking symbol on it. You know how much Steve loves to smoke, particularly in other people's houses. And, unfortunately, while she's doing the dishes or putting them away, she ended up breaking it. Typically, particularly if Steve was here or here, maybe even here, in terms of his self-awareness, he's going to get a little angry. He might even get a lot angry. He might curse, he might swear, he might get in an argument. He might not even hear that Sally is trying to apologize. If Steve is practicing meditation and mindfulness, then he would be able to catch himself before getting this upset. He would be able to notice an emotion arise and decide whether or not his initial emotional reaction to the situation is something that is conducive to the path. Does his anger perpetuate the ego? Does his anger perpetuate a sense of separation? Yes, because he's placing Sally outside of himself at an extreme distance through anger and attack. He's also not catching the ego as it grips him and essentially hypnotizes him into being this angry towards his roommate. If he's not capable of doing this within the moment, then Steve always has the opportunity to reflect. Later in the day, maybe the next week, or maybe he's begun this path and now he thinks about a couple years ago and he remembers, oh man, I got really upset at her. And now that I've become a little more self-aware, I can reflect on those moments in my life and decide moving forward, I'm not going to allow myself to get this upset. The best part about this journey is that there's really no wrong way to do it. These are just some helpful tools to help you on that journey. And these are just helpful steps. But you can use anything in order to reduce your sense of separation and your perpetuation of the ego. Because this path is so forgiving, Steve could go back to Sally the next day, the next week, and apologize. Tell her that, he lost himself in the moment, he really regrets getting that upset, and he realizes that he's attached to this mug, and he doesn't necessarily have to be so attached. That would be the portion of this tool set or this exercise where Steve is attempting to relinquish. He's surrendering or letting go of his attachment to the mug. He's surrendering and letting go of his propensity to anger. He's attempting to see Sally as, if not a part of himself, then someone worthy of love and compassion. This model that I set out in the last video is a good reminder of where we want to be when we're interacting with other people. If Steve isn't at a position or a perspective where he can empathize, then that's a good time to reflect, and next time try and be more empathetic towards somebody else's position. Another great way to help you stay mindful and measure your own position or propensity while in any given situation in relation to enlightenment is the Dr. Hawkins scale of consciousness. If we apply this scale of consciousness to the situation where he's upset at Sally for breaking his mug, then perhaps it'll be a little bit easier to understand. Essentially, the scale of consciousness that Dr. Hawkins came up with is a logarithmic scale from 0 all the way up to 1,000, where the numerical value correlates to both a level and a predominant emotional state. When Steve is angry, he would be at the level of anger, and his predominant emotional state would be some level of hatred. His goal, of course, is to reach enlightenment. So he would reflect and hopefully be able to relinquish this anger, relinquish this form of hatred, and move up the scale of consciousness, potentially to, let's say, forgiveness. If he was able to accept that Sally broke his mug in the moment and forgive her, then his view of life and his view of the situation would be harmonious. In general, the Dr. Hawkins scale of consciousness is useful in order to determine where somebody is on average or predominantly throughout their life. This side of the scale, below 200, is the survival paradigm and one of force. When you pass the threshold of 200, you enter into integrity, and is the threshold or the side of the scale that has to do with true power. Once you pass the level of 499 into 500, you've now crossed over into the spiritual paradigm. That means that you go from the Newtonian way of seeing the world, linear Newtonian way of seeing the world, into a subjective, non-dual, more quantum way of seeing the world. It is a lived experience that happens as you transition, and it is quite apparent when it does happen. Now, Steve might have a predominant level that he resides at most of the time, and let's just say that that was courage. If he was predominantly below this line of 200, then it's likely that he wouldn't be very interested in enlightenment. But he's heard about it, and he's made his way up the scale, and now he's in courage or neutrality. And he's curious about what enlightenment is. So he's going to attempt to discover within himself, throughout his daily life, or simply in meditation, what things are holding him back from rising up that scale of consciousness. Maybe he has a lot of fear in him, and he tends to repress it. If you were able to bring that fear up in meditation or notice it when it's triggered, and relinquish it through letting go, then he would naturally become more buoyant. He would naturally rise up on this scale of consciousness in a general sense. But let's give a couple more examples. So right here we got Steve, and he's at his mom's place. He's gone to visit for Thanksgiving, because that's coming up. And she's always talking about the same thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be your mom in your life, but there's usually somebody in your family or close to you that can bring up things that usually you're not patient with, and you have a certain bias towards their input. In this situation, let's say Steve, he's being talked to by his mom about how she's disapproving of his friend circle. He really likes his friends, and he's really tired of hearing about how she doesn't like his friends. In this scenario, because he's sighing, I put a little puff of air there, he might be in grief or apathy. He might even have a little bit of anger, pride towards his mom because he's prideful. She doesn't understand me. He's angry. Why can't she try to understand me? Or why can't she accept me? He has grief because I want my mom to understand me. I want her to accept me in my life and my friends. And, it makes me sad that we're not closer. And he even has perhaps apathy because I've tried so many times to explain to her why I'm hanging around the people I hang around with, or, maybe she could just give them a chance, but she never hears me, and I've gotten really tired of trying. In this example here, let's say Steve is on the computer and he's in an internet argument. That's never good. Usually puts you in a bad headspace for the rest of the day. So let's see where he might be during that internet argument. He's definitely going to be around anger. Even though he might be predominantly around courage, this experience is going to bring him to anger for sure. He might even have anxiety and fear if it's a public forum and people can see their debate or their discussion or their argument. You can have grief. He could be apathetic about trying to be understood. Any number of these emotional states might be coming up for him during this experience. And let's say Steve, he wants to take on something that might be difficult for him. He's going to try and quit smoking. We know that trying to quit smoking is not an easy task. And though he starts off at willingness or courage, in order to accomplish his feat, during that process, there are moments where he gets frustrated and angry. He has craving for those cigarettes, so he has a desire. He's afraid he might not achieve quitting. Maybe he has grief because, oh man, I never should have started in the first place. And he has apathy. Maybe what's the point? We're all going to die anyway. Why can't I just go get another pack of cigarettes? In this last example, Steve, he's tried really hard. He studied, he'd worked hard, he's trained, and he didn't get what he wanted. He didn't end up first place. And to make it even worse, it was Bill. Can you believe it? Bill doesn't even let him smoke in his house, and he got first place. So Steve's a little bit, disappointed. He might have grief again. He's got that desire for first place. He could be angry at Bill. He's prideful about, I worked really hard. I'm way better than him. I can't believe he got first place. In all of these scenarios, you can see how, even though, say with the smoking, or trying your hardest to achieve something, or getting into a discussion online, you can start off in a frame of mind of neutrality, willingness, acceptance, courage, and then quickly find yourself experiencing emotional responses that are below the level of 200. So how could Steve relinquish these things in order to rise up the scale in each of these scenarios? Well, he's started a meditation practice, which is good, and that's created the spaciousness that he needs in order to be mindful when he's in a conversation with his mother, or when he's online, when he's trying to do something difficult, or when he has a desire he's trying to achieve. Because he's mindful, he's able to decide how he wants to respond to something rather than his basic knee-jerk reaction that is habitual to his persona or ego. Because he's created that space that he needs, he's able to stay in at least fourth person perspective and hopefully fifth person perspective. In fifth person perspective, it's a lot easier for Steve to observe his interaction with his mom, or interactions online, or his difficulties quitting smoking, or his feelings about coming in third when he really, really wanted first place. From a perspective of someone who's done the work, let's say Steve, he's quite far along on the path. He's gotten used to staying observational. He's gotten used to relinquishing. He's gotten used to creating spaciousness so that during his life he's able to stay mindful. These situations might play out a little bit differently, and he might have a different perspective. So instead of his mom being, maybe nagging from this perspective, he realizes that she's just loving him in her way. She has an idea about what's right for her son. And even though it might not align with Steve's life, Steve can recognize that she's just trying to help. And he can have patience, he can have compassion, and he can be in a position where he's accepting, maybe he's loving. Or he can reason out why it is the way that she is. He can understand through reason that she is just trying to help. He could put himself in the position of maybe fourth person perspective and see that, she has her own thoughts, and that's okay. I accept them and I understand them. I'm able to forgive her for the position that she's in and the way she sees my life. I'm able to understand her. Let's see what the internet argument. The person's really upset at him. He doesn't seem to be able to get through to him, this other person on the computer. From a higher perspective, both within this framework, but particularly within this framework, he might see that the person online is just hurting. If it's difficult for them to communicate and they're saying a lot of expletives, they're angry, he could step back, and instead of falling into anger himself or pride, he can move up towards accepting that person, understanding where they are and why they're saying the things they're saying. And if he's particularly in a position of love, he'll be able to see that really this person's just asking for acceptance. They're asking for love. They have a lack of love in their life. They have a lack of self-love. And maybe he could say something that really turns the tide and helps that person feel seen. Maybe helps that person reflect. And in a non-aggressive way. How about when Steve is trying to quit smoking? He's all along this spectrum here. I should just be able to smoke. Or he's getting angry and irritable because it affects his chemicals in his brain. And he's desirous, he's craving that cigarette. He's fearful he won't be able to stop. He's grieving that he even started in the first place. He regrets starting. He's got despair because maybe I'll never be able to smoke. He's hopeless about it. I'll never be able to quit smoking, rather. He's hopeless about it. From a higher perspective, if he's able to move up to self-acceptance, willingness, even neutrality about the situation, it'll be a lot easier for him. If he's able to relinquish the craving, the fear of not being able to stop, he's able to relinquish his apathy towards being able to stop at all, he can move up into a higher state of emotion where he perceives the situation completely differently. He understands that it's an addictive chemical. It's going to be difficult for him to kick that addiction. He accepts where he's at, and he forgives himself for his past decisions. He's willing and he's optimistic about his attempt, and he's hopeful that he's going to achieve it. Even if he was neutral, then he trusts the process. He trusts that, it takes effort, it takes time, but he's going to get there. And if he's in the state, hopefully, he can be self-loving. He just needs to be more compassionate towards himself. He needs to accept himself. It's a difficult thing to do. He doesn't need to be upset at himself or sad about his past decisions. He is the one in this situation who needs love. And then let's talk about when Steve was upset at Bill, or he's upset about not getting first place after trying so hard to achieve something he wants. Initially, he feels anger towards him, pride about his own ability. But, he started off probably in courage or neutrality. He wanted to achieve this goal. There's potential that he started off down here. It could have come from a place of pride. It could have come from a place of anger. Maybe he is angry he never wins anything or achieves anything. It could just be a position of desire. He really, really desires getting the first place medal. But if he rises up through relinquishing these states of emotionality, these positionalities of the ego, he's able to congratulate Bill because everything just worked out the way it was meant to work out. His predominant state is trust or optimism. He forgives himself and he forgives Bill. He accepts that Bill won first place, and he's able to reason out to himself, you know what, I tried this hard, but pretty substantial possibility that Bill trained a little bit harder. He was in the last competition, or I didn't get it because it makes sense. Not rather, I didn't get it because X, Y, and Z in a hateful or angry way, or I didn't get it because some sort of victimizing way. But he understands why he didn't win first place, and he's okay with it. So, in order to answer that first question again, I showed you these stages of perspective of thinking, and now I'm showing you these states of emotionality or perspectives on the world and the experiences that you have. This is essentially the journey. You're utilizing the tools that you have of mindfulness, meditation, relinquishment, in order to pay attention and attempt to move up this scale, or to move more and more into higher realms of thought, higher states of thinking, higher states of self-awareness. And to the question, do you alternate between them? Yes, of course. It's very typical for someone, let's say, in willingness or acceptance. Their predominant state is they accept the world. Their predominant emotional state is forgiveness. Their view of life is harmonious. They see God as a merciful God. And the process that they're going through is transcendent. This side is not as relevant for our purposes, but let's say they get into a car accident, a fender bender. They might fall down this scale to fear or anger or grief or apathy because the stress of the situation is triggering these emotional states. Just because we fall down or we regress, it doesn't actually mean that that's where we predominantly are. And just because we rise up or progress doesn't mean that we're stuck or locked into that position. There's always opportunity for other things to arise. Essentially, your goal is to relinquish as much of the lower level emotionality as you can. And you do that through mindfulness, either in meditation or in daily life. Another way to visualize the enlightenment journey, basically, your true self is the sun. And everything that has to do with your ego, all of the thought forms, your emotions, your reactions, your beliefs, the concepts you have about life and who you are, what you're supposed to be doing, everything. They're just clouds. They're clouds that are obscuring the sun and the sunshine that is within you. As you engage in meditation, mindfulness, relinquishment, you start to clear away these clouds. And it might not seem like you're making any progress at the beginning of this journey, because that looks like a pretty far away mountain, doesn't it? It looks like a pretty long path. But if Steve keeps to it, then eventually he might see a little bit of his true nature peeking through the clouds. So that gives him a little bit more motivation. He's emboldened. So he keeps doing a little bit more work, and he knows that he'll get more and more of a sense of himself if he just keeps at it. And this is a real thing that actually happens as you progress. You start to sense and experience different states. You start to have a different outlook on life. You start to move up that scale of consciousness, and your perspective on life changes. You start to sense more and more of your true nature, and less separation between you and others. And it's not always straightforward. You could remove a lot of these clouds, a lot of the ego, and still not see much more sunlight than you've become accustomed to on the path. But as you do it, eventually, more and more of your true nature is revealed. And when you're quite close to relinquishing most of your ego, you might reside in a state of peace throughout your daily life. And your ego doesn't actually stick to you or pull you down as much because you've already revealed so much of your true nature. You're comfortable residing in your sense of I-ness or your sense of awareness and not always clouded. But because these clouds are still here, they might roll in during a certain emotional experience and cover more of your true self. But because you've relinquished so much already, those clouds are easy to remove. You've gotten good at the practice. And eventually, through the good work, through your practice, you achieve full attainment. You are no longer clouded by the small self, and you can reside in your true nature. And to answer Cloud But Floating's question, do I find life complicated at the stage I'm at now? The stage that I'm at now in terms of this framework, like I said, is essentially predominantly the fifth person perspective. I have glimpsed the unconditioned. I have achieved a sense of peace or awareness of the I or the beingness that pervades my daily life. But for the most part, I spend my time in the fifth. Is it complicated? I wouldn't say that it's any more complicated than normal. You're still doing the work. You're still using those tools in order to engage in the world in a mindful manner and attempt to relinquish. Considering that society functions on the basis of concepts, does it keep pulling you into identification with thoughts? Something that is typical on the path is that you relinquish a lot of what your old life used to be like. A lot of people end up quitting their jobs. They end up moving away, losing some friends through natural growing apart. And that's exactly what happened to me. The pull of society lessens as you go up this scale of consciousness because you're no longer as interested naturally in the things of society. You can still get pulled in for sure. You can have an experience. I might reside majority of the time in the level of love or reason, but if something triggers a subconscious reservoir of emotion, it's very likely and very common for those emotions to come to the surface. I have a video on the letting go technique, and if you're interested in learning more, I highly suggest that you watch that video because it's extremely useful to use the letting go technique in your daily life. Most of my progress is due to the three things I described: the meditation practice, the mindfulness practice, and relinquishing through surrender or letting go. So I hope this answered the questions, and I hope that it helped everybody else. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Just a note, if you are going to ask a question, and that's predominantly what you're trying to get my attention for, please start it off like this. Say question, and then write your question, because it's very easy for me to see that, okay, this comment is because they're asking me a direct question. There are tons and tons of discussions going on in the last video, tons and tons of comments, and I don't want to end up accidentally missing questions in the future or questions on this video because I didn't see them within a much longer comment. I know that in the last video that it seemed like my expression towards the later stages was very bleak or listless or unmotivated. That's not what I was trying to communicate. What I was trying to communicate was the emotional turmoil or the emotional byproduct of having glimpsed the unconditioned or glimpsed the formless or having achieved a certain level of self-awareness. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to participate in society, and it doesn't mean I don't find life enjoyable or pleasant or fun. It's actually, majority of the time, the contrary. What you lose motivation for is the stuff you used to take seriously. I used to have a 9-to-5 job. I no longer have that job. And I quit the job because it doesn't fit with my model of reality anymore. It's not something I take seriously. I'm in a transitionary phase where the ego is being dismantled, it is dissolving, and I now need to find ways to participate in society and better humanity through skillful work and through my actions. And that's what this video is about, and that's what my channel is about, is to serve others.